So speaking of Michael Schussler's with us today. And Michael is one of the leading fantasy experts in America today. He's been on fire this year. So happy to have him over at What's on Sports. They call him the Charm City Cash Cow because, well, he makes you money and he makes you a lot of it. We're going to bring Michael out today to talk about something very special. Michael today wants to talk about his fantasy awards. So Michael Schussler's in the house. Michael, how are you, buddy?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, brother. It's so good to see you.
Yeah,
love the red shirt today. Very Christmassy.
Well, it is the winter solstice, which is why we're celebrating.
I don't know what that means.
The winter solstice is it's the winter holiday that we celebrate around the world for the shortest day of the year, which is December 21st. So it's a way to celebrate while everyone's depressed and sad because it's cold and dark. And it's actually a special one this year because there's something called the Great Conjunction happening, which is where the two biggest planets in our solar system, which would be Jupiter and Saturn, are converging, at least from our perspective. And it looks like they are forming one giant planet. And it's actually what many people think the three wise men used in the biblical story to find the manger and Jesus. That was the North Star, not the North Star, but the Star of Bethlehem was Jupiter and Saturn converging. And actually, what's interesting is in 2020, this will be the smallest or the minimum space between the two planets from our perspective, which they call arc minutes, and it will be 6 arc minutes. So it's going to look pretty amazing tonight if anyone gets out there and is able to see the sky. But because it's the winter solstice, this is a sports podcast anyway, we are celebrating the fantasy.
Hang on. I gotta ask you a question. Have you ever like asked a question like sometimes you're like, oh hey, how you doing? And then you're like, why'd I ask that question? So that's what just happened. It's just really literally one of those moments where I'm like, oh, winter solstice, what is that? And then you actually explained it. So I'm so sorry that I did that to all the listeners out there. I'd like to apologize. You did a great job explaining though. Well, I should have never asked that question though. I'm very sorry. Let's talk about your fantasy awards. People watch this show and listen to this show and download this show because they want to know more about football, more about sports, and they really come on to really get into your fantasy awards. And by the way, I'm really looking forward to Wednesday because Wednesday you're going to be on the show talking about your NBA fantasy choices coming up here for all those guys that are in NBA drafts and stuff like that. So it's super exciting about that. But today we're kind of wrapping up football, kind of wrapping up the football season, which is sad for me. But I'd love to hear your fantasy awards for the NFL this year.
It's sad for me too. And it's the fantasy playoffs. Yeah, of course. But we move into actual NFL playoffs, which is some of the most exciting sports around in the world. So here are my fantasy awards, and these are the best players that I've chosen relative to their fantasy value or their ADP average draft position from the beginning of the season. So we will
so hang on for those people out there that don't follow. At the beginning of the year, they kind of tell us where people should be drafted. So you say ADP is average draft position. So somebody should have been drafted like a first round, or you talking about the average draft position of where they were actually drafted?
So it's where they were actually drafted in drafts this year. And then that all gets compiled, through ESPN, Yahoo, Best Ball. There's all these different kind of draft things.
You're a stat machine. You get it from everywhere.
Exactly. So my QB award goes to Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, wow.
As you can see on the screen. Now, Aaron Rodgers, he has 3,828 passing yards. He's got 40 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. That's good for 332 fantasy points. And his average draft,
good for the league MVP too.
Yeah, it's very close. His average draft position was 87.3. So that's an 8th round pick. Right.
Wow.
Now, Aaron Rodgers only has less total fantasy points than Patrick Mahomes, whose ADP was 14.3. That's a second round pick, an early second round pick. Aaron Rodgers also has 45 more total fantasy points than my boy Lamar Jackson, his ADP was 17.4. So that's another second round pick, but you're getting value with Aaron Rodgers that you would have loved to wait on a quarterback. And that's what they always say. Fantasy drafts, you can wait on quarterback. Another honorable mention for this could have really been Josh Allen, who's having an amazing year. He's got 30 passing touchdowns, 8 rushing touchdowns, and his ADP was actually behind Aaron Rodgers. He was like 96. So could have waited for the 9th round to get Josh Allen, who's outproducing, Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, all these other guys, Deshaun Watson, who were taken in the top end of drafts.
Michael, just so you know, I found that what you just said to be incredibly interesting, but somebody else in the chat room found something else you said to be incredibly interesting. Lovely wanted to thank you for the explanation on the winter solstice. So I was wrong. There was one person who actually cared about that. And again, totally my bad. Let's talk about your favorite running back. I'm sorry, the running back that's going to get your Schussler Award this year.
The running back that gets my fantasy award has got to be James Robinson. Another guy that I've brought up, talked to you about a bunch of times. He was undrafted, not only in the NFL draft, but in most fantasy drafts as well. His ADP comes in at 162. So most fantasy drafts only have 16 rounds. So he's either not drafted or drafted in the very last round as a complete flyer. And my gosh, this guy has just gone absolutely off this year. He's got over 1,000 rushing yards, 10 total touchdowns, 49 receptions.
Wow.
That's good for 250 fantasy points. He's absolutely
imagine if this guy played on a good team.
Well, he is the entire Jaguars organization right now. And they're really getting behind this kid, and it's a shame that he was injured yesterday against the Ravens. Hopefully he's okay, but he's out producing guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I talked about was, supposed to be a first-round draft pick, even Nick Chubb, Kenyon Drake. These are names, that were taken so much earlier, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
So that value with James Robinson has been, absolutely fantastic. He gets my running back award.
Let's move to the outside a little bit. I'd love to know about the wide receiver that you think has got the Schussler Award this year.
Another rookie. It's got to be Justin Jefferson, who
I drafted this guy, by the way. I drafted this guy.
What position did you draft him at? Do you remember what round?
Oh God, I'm going to be honest. He was maybe he had to be close to the 10th round. I mean, he was late. Like when I took him, people were making fun of me. Who's Justin Jefferson? He's like the 7th best rookie. I'm like, no, this guy's going to be a stud. Watch. He's filling in a great position for the Vikings. Vikings like to toss the ball around. They can throw the ball around because they can run the ball. I mean, it just seemed like a no-brainer to me.
Absolutely.
I'll be honest. I didn't think he would take off until mid-season. Thought it would take a minute for him to get into the lineup and prove. I was wrong about that though. This kid was on fire right away.
But you were right to take him, and you took him a little bit earlier than most people because his ADP was 123. So that's about the 11th or 12th round. But Justin Jefferson is the 8th overall, scoring wide receiver in fantasy this year. He's got more fantasy points than Mike Evans, who was drafted in the 3rd round in most leagues, and even his teammate Adam Thielen, whose ADP was 31.8. So there's another, 3rd round pick that Justin Jefferson has been out producing. As far as fantasy goes, he's made plenty of fantasy managers like you very happy, and another stud rookie is going to have a great career. Love Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, so that's actually 2 rookies on your list right now, right?
That's right. Now you can probably this will be the last position that I'm doing. It's tight end. You have to know who this is. I talked about him.
It's going to be Rob Gronkowski.
You wish. Oh, no. Nah, it's Travis Kelce. Like, honestly, it's got to be, because now Travis Kelce is a 1st-round pick, okay, in fantasy drafts. Yes, his ADP was actually 22, so he's about a 2nd-round pick, late 2nd-round pick. But still, Travis Kelce, he's got over 50 more fantasy points than the 2nd highest scoring tight end, which is Darren Waller. And get this, Travis Kelce has over 125 more fantasy points than the 3rd place tight end, Robert Tonyan. So, yeah, I mean, Kelce, the advantage of having Travis Kelce in your tight end slot is immeasurable. And that's why when I brought up, the amount of playoff teams or amount of fantasy teams in the playoffs, 70% of them had guys like James Robinson and Travis Kelce, because that value just can't be found anywhere else.
So I play in a league. I play in a league that's like $1,000 league. I play in a couple different leagues, but one of them is over at FFPC. .com, and it's $1,000 league, and that league happens to be a league where tight ends, for whatever reason, only tight ends get 1.5 points per reception.
Tight
ends become incredibly valuable. And believe it or not, the guy who's got the best record of anybody happens to have Travis Kelce as his tight end. He crushes us every week because Kelce hasn't had days like Waller. Waller's had I think some better peak days, but Kelce's floor has been much better, and he's been very consistent throughout the year. Yeah, he's been very consistent. And even those 120-yard, one touchdown things, it's like, if you can do that almost every week, I mean, he's just been amazing. And where did you say his average draft position was?
Kelce's was 22. So that's late second round, which is honestly, I mean, looking back, it's like, damn, I wish I would have grabbed Kelce in the early second round if I could. You know, you love to get those stud running backs early on, but I can't say it enough. The advantage of having Kelce in your tight end slot, getting all those points, all those targets. He's on the best offense in the league. He's the best tight end in the league, maybe the best pass catcher in the league beside Devontae Adams. You get to play him as a tight end. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, win-win. His name is Michael Schussler. They call him the Charm City Cash Cow, and he's the host of the Fantasy Fallout podcast, which you can see on our Facebook page every Tuesday and every Thursday. And also, Michael writes some really cool, to me, some really amazing articles over on whatsonsports.com. Michael, I'm going to bring you back in just a little bit. I'm going to send you back to the green room, and I'm going to bring you back for a game a little later on. But thanks so much for all that great content. That was awesome.
Of course.
God, man, every time the guy comes on, I feel like I feel a little bit smarter. Actually, sometimes I got to be honest. Sometimes I feel a little dumber because he'll say something and I'm like, that makes sense, and I should have done that. You know, I'm not a fantasy guy. I'm more of a gambler. So, but every time he tells me something, throughout this year, and Michael helped me out a little bit, just casual conversations, really more than really just a one-on-one tutelage, but casual conversations of like, oh, I do this and I do this. I sort of paid attention to him a lot. I learned a lot from him. I won some decent money this year in fantasy. Let's see. We got some comments out there. What would Kelce be without Mahomes? Well, Lance, what would any of these? I'm sorry, Lawrence. What would any of these players be without Patrick Mahomes? Patrick Mahomes is without a doubt the most electrifying quarterback probably in the NFL. I mean, he's got a tremendous amount of weapons. He takes advantage of them, and he really, really uses them really well. And that offense is good. It's very creative. We got one more comment from Lovely Glorioso, who's like Kelce with a heart. Aw, how sweet. How sweet. Apparently Lovely has a crush on Travis Kelce. All right. Anyway, he is dreamy, isn't he?